All right, here we are talking about coaching. I'm Yannick. I'm here with Siwash. Nikki's already gone, so we decided to stay on a little bit longer. Nikki encouraged us, and so you've got the two of us today for a little while longer. Siwash, I gotta let you say hi.
Hello, everyone.
Hey. So, question today is how do you close a consultation? And I know we did a whole, I think, hour-long special, the two of us, on how to run effective consultations. I know you've been doing this for a very long time. You've been teaching this. You've been developing methodologies and processes. You've got a ton of experience of the sales part in coaching, which arguably is the most important part. Because if you don't do that well, you don't get to work with clients, and clients don't get to do the work, right? So I think it's really important that we talk about it, because I know a lot of coaches are struggling with that. And I certainly know that I didn't leave enough time for a very long time to close. And it's someone who I don't actually like at all, who I don't even want to mention his name, but who I'm thankful for that he helped me to make a distinction between the consultation and the closing of the consultation, right? Because the closing part, I think, is really important. So now I try to leave at least 10, 15 minutes to do that, depending how long your initial calls are. You can do that in different ways, whether you have that all in one call or you spread it out over different calls. I think there's different systems out there. But essentially what we're focusing on is, okay, you've had a conversation. Your client has had a bit of an experience of what it's like to be in conversation with you. You get a good understanding of where they want to be or who they want to be. And now, what do you do to bring this to a close? What do you do to get to the client saying, yes, I want to do this, and how are we going to do it? So that you can leave that call with a clear plan of what's going to happen next. And they sign the contract, you've agreed on the price, you agreed on the package, you have confidence that this client really wants to do this, that they're committed. So I know you've got a system, and I'd love to explore that.
Yeah.
But I also want to add in a couple of because I'm not so structured, right, as a person and also not as a coach. But there's a number of things that I do on a regular basis. And so maybe we can explore your system a little bit, and then maybe I can add some things like, oh yeah, these are the things I do, or maybe I do it in a different way, or this is really interesting. And then we can see where that conversation goes. How does that sound?
Yeah, sure. And I think just to mention before we start, like there is not one way of doing it. There's lots of different ways. I've seen different ways work for people, and I just found this way, just for most coaches, like just feel quite easy and more in alignment and less manipulative and less sleazy. And just before we dive into the
Will you say less? So
Well,
it is somewhat manipulative
no,
and
I
sleazy?
think no, it's not sleazy at all, I think. And again, I think it's doing it in a way that
But a little manipulative? Okay, let's be clear. Is there some manipulation?
No, I
in
don't
this?
think there's any.
Because that's, I think a lot of coaches have that concern, right? We're joking, but it's
Yeah.
also not joking, right? Because that's the concern, that there is a form of manipulation going on when we bring a sale to a close, that we somehow get what we want rather than what the client wants.
Yeah.
Right? Because essentially ethical selling means we make it work for them. We find a way that this is a good fit. Otherwise, I don't want to sell what I've got. What I've got.
Well, I think my distinction is usually there, serving versus pleasing. We've talked about this in another episode, right? It's for me, it's around like putting my own feelings aside and really looking at what will serve the client here. For me, like, I've done dozens and dozens of sales trainings, read probably dozens of books on it, spent a lot of money to just learn this skill. And what I found really useful is just a few principles. One is that it's not about me, it's about them, right? And if you really sit with this principle, right, if you really understand this, it allows you to become really good at it. And I think what most coaches is, including myself for the first few years, is what gets in the way is our own stuff, right? And so part of getting really good at this is looking at your own stuff and seeing like what are some of those stories and beliefs that potentially get in the way in these conversations, and even working with them, with a supervisor, with a coach. So that's one part. Happy to go a bit further into that if you want. But the other part is really looking at that, right? Like, it's not about me, it's about them. And that comes back for me around serving versus pleasing, right? because a lot of times I've hold back, and I see this with coaches a lot. They hold back because they don't want to break rapport, or they don't want to kind of, because you're coaching someone and you feel good, they're getting, they're benefiting from it, it's useful for them. Now you feel like when I go into the sales part, it's almost like we lose that, because now they could say no, or that they might feel like I'm taking advantage from of this whole situation. So what I like to look at is like, what would serve this person in front of me? And I remember in a sales training learning this, and he said, look, ultimately it's about helping the client make the best decision for them, right? If the best decision for them is taking the next step, okay, well, help them do that. If it's not, then don't help them do that. Don't like force them into a sale, because and we all make this mistake. I think if it happens, sometimes we get excited. I've had this, like, what, I can coach anyone, I can transform anyone, and and then I reflect back on the relationship and see that, well, actually, probably, it would have been probably better if I didn't work with this person, looking at the start of the relationship.
If they got to work with someone else instead, who might be a better fit, right? Because if you serve someone better and you send them to someone who you think will be a much better coach for them, they'll remember that, right? And you're not going to just sell them, because I think it's important to acknowledge that once we sat with someone in this confidential, powerful listening space, it feels really confirming, feels really empowering. We are in a psychological relationship where we have some influence over someone, sometimes considerable influence, depending on how they are and who they are, right? Some people show up quite vulnerable, and like salespeople can really pick that up and realize, oh, I've got power now. And this is where the manipulation comes in, right? I've got power now. This salesperson who shall not be named actually is quite open about that. He said, whether somebody buys something or not, it's not up to them, it's up to me. Right? So if they don't buy, then I didn't do a good enough job. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I get it. And I can see it because I've learned about psychology of persuasion. But here's a big ethical component.
Yeah.
Just because you can close the deal doesn't mean that you should, or that in most cases, I think it's good for you. I think, what is it? Zig Ziglar? I don't know. There's this sales guru who actually I really appreciated. Something I read from him was that you're building relationships. So if you can sell something to someone once based on false promises and influence and persuasion, but then you're not going to do it again, because usually people find out that wasn't really serving them. In coaching, it's a bit more ambiguous. If you work with a mediocre coach, you can't quite tell because you don't have any comparison, and you're still going to get a lot from it, if you're committed and you want to do the work. So it's a bit more tricky. But I think the main point is that if you serve a client well, and if that means that you refer them to someone else, they'll remember it and they'll probably send you more people, right? And also, every time I had some doubt somewhere whether I should say yes to this, they really wanted to work with me, and there was some doubt somewhere, but maybe I needed the money that month, or maybe I thought like, oh yeah, well, I can help them, right? But whenever I didn't listen to that gut instinct, I usually regretted it, and sometimes much later. So I think it's important to listen to that in the spirit of that principle of serving. That's super important.
Yeah, it is. And I think at the same time, you're not always going to get it right? I think it's, it's, and personally, what I like to do, I've attended a lot of trainings where they say you have to, if you want to be really good at this, you have to take either their details, their credit card details, their bank details, whatever it is. Take their details so the initiative is on your side. Personally, I do it the opposite, right? Because what I don't like that when I'm on the other side, when I'm buying something, right? I've invested probably now over 350K in coaching and mentoring, right? And the way I like to buy is I like to keep at least 24 hours. I like to discuss with my wife. And I'm not saying that's the only way or the right way, but I like to just bring a similar approach in my own work, where if someone is a yes, I'm like, okay, great. Now here's the thing. This is not just a money commitment, it's a time commitment, energy commitment. So I'd like you to just think a little bit more about that. If tomorrow you still feel the same, then let's. And by the way, before I get off the call, I discussed the next steps. So we can go into the how to in a second.
Sorry, Siwash, can we rewind a little bit? What's the question you asked to invite a yes or no, or to check to get to that point where someone gives you that answer? How do you ask the question, and is there some groundwork to lead up to it?
Yeah, I think the groundwork is, I think, both are important. So I see it a little bit. My discovery phase is an actual coaching session, right?
Oh, we've been through that, right? There's an hour that we discussed this.
Yeah.
So now, at which point does it transition into the closing?
Yeah.
part?
So my transition question is usually very simple: is would you like to know how we can continue coaching together, right? And so another transition question could be, would you like to hear how we can continue working together in a professional setting? But I like to keep it quite simple. So they've experienced coaching now. And just, I don't know if
yeah, similar here, by the way, just to add my bit in, I often say something like, I'm just having an eye on time. We've got 10, 15 minutes left. I want to make sure, like I said in the beginning, that we have some time to discuss how we might bring this together if it feels right to you. So first of all, does this feel right to you? Yeah. Shall we explore how we might work together?
Yeah. I think that,
and just being quite open to acknowledge this.
I think that permission is really important. And the difference between that is, like, I call it push versus pull. Most salespeople, they don't ask permission. They just go like, hey, Yannick, I know I can help you. Let me tell you about the 3 ways I can help you. And here's how I can help you. Here's the prices. And I've done that. And it just, for me, like, it just feels like very much like a push energy, right? You're pushing people into kind of like, people feel pushed, right? And here's an underlying principle around that. It's like, people love to buy, but they don't like to be sold to, right? So I think
some people might challenge that, I think some people would say people want to be sold to in the right way, right? Some people need the invitation and they appreciate the leadership and the guidance.
Oh yeah, 100%. So for me, it's the steps. I'm going to share the steps. It's all about leadership and guidance, right? So for example, the first question is, would you like to know how we can continue? And usually you get a yes. I'm like, great. So here's how I work. So for me, usually I start with like, here's how I work. And that's, for example, like I might say like, hey, my work is a combination of coaching, mentoring, and supervision. Now here's where you can describe a little bit about how you work with your clients. Then the third thing is, I go, once I've done that, I ask them, are there any other questions? If they're good. Then I go to the next part, which is, here are 3 ways we can work together. And again, you could share one way. Personally, both can work. A lot of bigger companies, marketing companies, they recommend doing one way, giving people one option. Personally, I think for coaches, what really work well is giving people 3 options. But again, that depends also whether you want to work with people in multiple ways. So for me, it's like, we can work together. It used to be 12 months, 6 months, 3 months. Now it's, for example, we can work 1-on-1, or we can work in this group setting. And then I have 2 groups, right? But again, that's your menu. That can be a whole different episode, right? But again, so
and just to say, I used to have one. I just wrote up all the evolution of kind of my packages, my process there. I'm going to put that out in my starter kit. Actually, I told you about it. But I used to have one, then I had 3. 3 made a big difference. I really liked that, and I realized that part of my values as a human being and also as a coach, obviously, then are about choice and responsibility and tailoring things in a way that it makes the most sense. And then also the coaching industry has experienced a bit of a slump, and lots of people, there was a crisis of cost of living, and lots of people had less money. So relatively recently, I introduced a few more packages and a few more options to make the initial sum more manageable. Right. So rather than dropping my prices, I introduced a few different packages. For example, I now have a six session option that just kind of halves the cost of investment. So I now actually being transparent about it. And I said, well, there's more, marketing experts tell me, or sales experts tell me that I give people too much choice, but I really value choice very highly. So I'm being transparent. I make it clear that this is why there are a lot of options, and it makes it more difficult to choose one, perhaps, but I can help someone guide them through. So then I say, well, how about I talk you through what I've got sitting on the shelf? My experience tells me people find it easy to say yes to one of those because it feels right. maybe I have one in mind, and I might say, I have one in mind that I think would work really well for you. But let me tell you what's on the menu, and then you can tell me what you think. How about that? And again, that subtle permission asking. It's like, okay, cool, let's do that. And I have a few slides as well. And I say I have a few slides just because people appreciated looking at something.
Yeah.
And also I can send you that deck so you don't have to take copious notes.
Yeah, I like that.
Right? So all of this little contracting bits, really helpful to kind of set up the process. They know what will be done. They know what choices they have and why I give people choices. And they know that there's a time when they can ask questions and when we can discuss this, and that I expect them to tell me what they think afterwards. So it all sets it up so that they pay good attention.
Yeah. And I think, I think, you get a lot of experience with it. And I do encourage to do that, right? Whether it's using slides or I just share my iPad screen and basically give them a visual by, okay. Yeah, look, I think the important thing is, right, is finding a bit of the middle way. Like, I remember, like, in the beginning, I was making it too simple, saying, okay, well, we can work to 3 months of coaching with me. 12 sessions is £1,000, and I would just be like, that's it, right? And I think on the other side, sometimes people overdo it, and they're like describing each package and taking 20 minutes for each package and saying, well, this is how you get that, and this is how you get that. We can do it. And I think it's finding the middle way, because in reality, right, I really think that people don't buy your program, right? They're looking at the question that people are sitting with is like, can this person help me? Can this person help me achieve my goal? Can this person help me, solve this problem that I have, right? And so I think that mindset is really useful. So personally, like when I come to that part around my menu, I like to keep it really simple, right? So here are 3 ways we can work together. Here are a few things that we're going to do in this. Maybe, like, for example, I share, like, we have 3 sessions a month, this and this. And I like to, again, like, bring it back to, like, with everything I'm doing, and I'm doing this very intentionally around how will it help this person with what they have, right? The mistake I've made.
So you build the links into the packages.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's
the links to the goal.
Yeah, whether it's one-on-one coaching or whether it's group coaching or whatever you do, just remembering that, you're not selling the program, right? You're basically just communicating how you can help this person achieve the thing that they want, right?
How the program is a means to the end that they just told you about.
Yeah, exactly.
For the last
like
45 minutes.
I don't need to, like, whereas, again, it doesn't matter, right? I still sell 101 coaching, and even with 101, it's just I bring it back to, like, okay, you said these are the 3 most important things for you. Here's what we'll do, and here's how we will, work on that. And then once I've shared that, and I share the price high to low, so here's, for example, the 12-month option, 6-month option, 3-month option. Here are the prices, and then I just create a bit of space. And I think here's the thing, right? The space is really important, because now you've shared a few things. People need to just process it, right? In sales books, you read around, like, the first person that talks loses. I don't believe that stuff, right? I don't. For me, it's not about that. But I think creating the spaces
loses.
Yeah, I think, for them, it's like, it's so much transactional, like, winning and losing. But I think, if you do this the right way, you create a bit of space. And then sometimes I just check in, like, what are your thoughts? And and you say, well, I like package 1 or like package 2.
Even what are your thoughts? Just, it feels kind of too inviting for me, right? For me, what I do is I have an overview, because, right, I have quite a few options, and I created an overview page where they're all summarized.
Yeah.
Right. And then at that point, I just physically lean back. Right. So embodying the opening up of space. I also believe it's a good thing not to jump into saying something straight away, but just creating space physically by giving them some space, even if it's just leaning back a little bit and letting them process what's on there.
Yeah, and that's actually brilliant, right? I didn't even think about it, but that's usually what I do as well. But what it does, right, is the opposite of what most salespeople do. They just keep pushing, and it's almost like they're getting closer and closer and closer. But when you basically just lean back a bit, it's you're basically saying, okay, take a bit of time, And the other thing is, I think, how comfortable we are. right? The more comfortable I got in this part of the conversation, right? And really, the more I'm inviting the other person to just get in that same space, because it's there's so many things that happen in that moment. There's so many things that happen. There's they're thinking like, oh, maybe previous bad experience and getting triggered. There's so many things that can happen in that moment. And so I think just inviting them back into that calm space, in that coaching space. So for me personally, like I don't overthink those questions. There's different questions I ask, but I still have my coaching hat on. I don't have my sales hat on, right? I burned my sales hat, 6 years ago, and it's gone really well because of that. Because when we have the sales hat on, we're like, oh, they're gonna give me an objection. Like, let me think about this, and then we're like, oh, how do I handle the objection, right? But when someone says to me like, hey, I need to look at my finances, usually there's a few common objections like, I need to do this, I need to do that. I'm like, okay, that's
Let me think about it. Need to talk to my wife or my
and I say
partner.
like, great, that's good. And I just invite them into a little bit. I continue the conversation. And this, you mentioned the time. I prefer to keep more time for it, right? So my sessions are usually 90 minutes. I like to keep 45 minutes for it. If your session is an hour, I would say leave at least 30, 40 minutes for this. If you have the kind of two call process. If you have one call, it becomes a little bit tricky. But what I've seen is from experience is if you keep more time for it, whatever is coming up on the other side, you can often just coach them around that, right? And I'm not saying, by the way, I don't want people to hear this in the wrong way. We're not coaching them into buying. I'm just coaching them and helping them once they get a bit of more clarity. So when someone says, I need to think about it, what I used to do in the past is to say, okay, cool, go think about it and come back to me. I never do that, right? So whatever someone says,
me neither anymore. Now it feels so stupid.
I think what happens is when you kind of do that, right? For me, it feels like the sales process is a bridge. Now I've had this great coaching session, and there's all these different parts in the bridge where people can kind of fall through the bridge. And what my job is, I want to just guide them. I don't want to push them over the bridge, right? I want to guide them, and I'm just taking it, and I'm just coming back towards. I'm giving them actually a lot of what's the right word here? Autonomy, like a lot of control here by just asking them, okay, tell me a bit more about that, right? And so what you will notice in my process that it's very much like a coaching process, but there's some questions that I use to lead them through this process. But I'm leading them through the process in a very calm and relaxed way. But it's very supportive, and I remember there's a TED talk. I'll find it and maybe we can link it under this. There's a TED talk on checklists, and I think it's really great. It's really transformed my proposal, because what I noticed is that if you look at professionals, right? If you look at, for example, a doctor, right? People used to die because sometimes doctors would forget to wash their hand, right? During a pregnancy, for example, a woman would die, and then they create a checklist. And they did the same, in airplane engineering. So everywhere now, all these different professions have checklists. And I thought, hey, we can have a checklist here. So I created this checklist. And based on this, what I noticed is that if I take people through those 10, 12 steps on the checklist, people are much more likely to go from one side to the bridge to the other side. And by the way, that doesn't mean that now...
Do you have the checklist? Can you read us the checklist?
No, I don't have the checklist in front of me, but that's usually what's on the checklist. First questions around... Ask them, would you like to know how we can continue? Then it's about, okay, tell them how you work. Step 3, talk about your menu. Step 4, give them a bit of space. Step 5 is, again, and of course, it's not like, it's sometimes it depends on the response, because sometimes people will be like, okay, I feel really good about this. I'm interested in maybe one of these 2 packages, right? So part of the checklist for me is another few important questions is like, okay, sometimes just slowing down and asking them which ones feels more aligned for you, or which one feels better. And then once they're like, yes, my question is, when would you like to get started? And I always ask this question before the price, and I'll explain why. Because when I ask them, when would you like to get started? Or not before the price. I tell them the price, but before, how do you want to pay? Because, again, some of you might listen to this thing like, well, is that not manipulating them? Well, maybe, but I'm doing it. If we do this from a place of service, and again, we're asking them questions, we're not pushing them into it. When I ask them, when would you like to get started? And they say, for example, 1 week, 2 weeks, or I just recently had someone that said, yeah, I want to start second week of November. I'm like, great, let's put that first coaching call on the calendar. So when we put the
second week of November recently meant it was like 2 months in the future.
Yeah, no, I think it was
a month in the
so
future.
end of September. Someone said, I want to start second week. So we're recording this for people that are listening to this. We're recording this like end of October. Recently, I had someone that a month ago, end of September, said, I want to start in November. So what I then usually do is say, okay, let's put that first coaching call on the calendar. And we take a bit of time. We put the coaching call on the calendar. And sometimes what I do, you don't have to do this. I like to do this. If there's a bit of a gap, so we have almost like a 6-week gap between this current conversation and the first call, I like to give them something in the middle. And I said, hey, what about we have a bonus session? I would like to support you in this time that we have, right? They want to start 6 weeks because they're traveling. And every time I do this, well, most of the time I do this, like people really appreciate that little bit of support in between. But I think the key thing to get here is get a little commitment. And again, you're not pushing them to get a commitment, but you're asking them, when would you like to start it? 1 week? In 1 week, 2 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever it is, put a little call in the calendar. Again, all of this is done, right, just through leadership. And what it does, there's a little bit of commitment. And then the next question is, how would you like to pay? Right? Yeah. We've already talked, they've kind of chosen a package, a preferred package. If the package is, let's say, 5,000, say, okay, so the package that you would like to go with is 5,000. How would you like to pay? Sometimes they ask me, or they might ask you, hey, is it upfront? You have a few different choices here. For me, it's usually the answer is yes, and then I just hold space again. If they say great, then I give them the
check their reaction.
Yeah, I think it's just slowing down.
Challenging. They might not say something, but you might sense that there's, and you can check into that.
Yeah, I think exactly.
And then you have the conversation. How can you manage this? If you're willing to split this across a couple of installments, which I'm usually super fine about, I don't charge anything extra or anything.
Yeah.
At this point, I'm here to make this work for us. And I often say that as well.
Yeah, I think that's good. And here's the thing, Yannick. Look, with every one of these points that I mentioned, we could go really deep, like 30 minutes an hour. And I've done that with people. Because also in every single point, usually coaches have like, oh, but I feel like this. Oh, but this is what's coming up for me. So as a quick example, in the beginning, whenever I ask a client, how would you like to pay? And they say, well, how would you like me to pay? I would say, well, 5,000, but if you want, you can pay 10 payments of 500, right? Because I was so uncomfortable holding that space there. I was like, well, right. I'm really flexible. So, and again, I'm not saying that that's bad. It's more about why you do it.
Usually people pay up front. Occasionally, people choose to pay in installments to have a continuous commitment to the work. Yeah. How would you like to do it? Right? I like choice, right? Again, this is my choice. Yeah. And, marketing experts might say, oh, no, I mean, it should be upfront because that's better for you and better for your business. But I want that it's better for the person who's there. Some people, they pay upfront and then the money is gone and they don't think about it anymore. And the money is actually an important part of staying committed to this process. The money isn't primarily for them to be invested and not for me to have money.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is, again, like a much longer conversation, but, there's no right or wrong here. I think there's things around that people write around like, oh, you're doing yourself and your business a disservice by putting people on payment plans. My experiences, I've worked with probably now 300-400 paying clients, and it's maybe like 90-95% of completion rate in terms of people keeping their payments, right? Yeah. So I think when you do this in a good professional way, it is fine. But again, it's not a good or bad. I know people that only charge up front and their business is going well. Like they have a good business. And I know people that personally, I like both. And I like to give people choices and I like to hold a bit of space there. And by the way, here's the fun thing. Just by holding a bit of space there, a lot more people pay up front. Right? And then when I give people a choice, I think it's just important to just explain that a little bit. Like this is not, my way of explaining is like, hey, this is not a gym membership where you can just cancel anytime. If you work together for 3 months, it's a 3-month commitment. If you work together for 6, 12, it's a commitment, right? I think it's important to create a little bit of an agreement there that, is, and if you notice a bit of resistance there, then maybe make it shorter. Maybe they need to just have a, like you said, like a 6 session agreement. But I think it's just, again, like the important thing is just as a coach to be present, right? Not just go through a process like robotically, but I'm checking in, like, is that okay? So
Yeah. There's you talked about the bridge, right? And I think that's essentially the thing, that we don't leave them alone on the bridge. We're still helping them and supporting them if they need some space. And I think it's good that they have some space. For coaches, it can feel a bit uncomfortable to give them space because,
yeah,
if we're very confident, it's fine to give them space because this is going to be a good thing for them and you've done it well. But a bit of guidance while they're on the bridge is quite helpful.
yeah,
So you mentioned that having something in the calendar is a super important part of that closing process for me. What I usually say is, look, my process from here on is, I think you should go away and think about this.
yeah,
Right? It's important you sleep on it. I tend to not allow people to make a decision on the spot and transfer the money. I want them to take this away. And that kind of shows confidence. And I say my process is, we hang up after this. I'll send you the summary of what's on offer. Like I said, I would. I'll send you my written agreement. Nothing in there that should surprise you, really. But if there is something, we can ask questions. This is our agreement. Nothing's written in stone. We can have conversations about what's in there if you find anything. And the only thing I'm asking is that you decide how long you want to think about this, and we then put a follow-up call in the calendar. You decide when that is. Doesn't have to be long, 15, 20 minutes max. And if you make a decision in the meantime, you can always send that agreement back. I'll send you a link to sign up and a link to book your first session. But that will give you enough space. So people really appreciated that because I'm inviting them. I'm offering some guidance and some leadership on how the process works. But they decide all the important choices here. They decide how long they want to think about it. And then I do think it's helpful to think about common objections and how you might respond to them. Right? Because it used to feel so I was laughing earlier and said, oh, that's so stupid now, but it used to feel so respectful to say, yes, think about it. You know where to find me. A ball is in your court. You know everything you need to know. But it's not actually as helpful as it could be. Now I know how to respond to, I don't let me think about it. And I say, yes, absolutely, you should think about it. It's an important part of the process. While you're going away and think about it, most of my clients think about, do they want to work with me or do they want to work with another coach? And you might be exploring some options, which I encourage you to do. Pause there for a little bit so that, sometimes they respond to that. It's like, no, I feel really good about this. Maybe they don't. And I continue. I say, is this the right package, right? Which one of these options from the menu would be good for you? Is there something in between we haven't talked about it? Right? That's something that people might think about. Is this the right time? Do you have some loose ends to tie up? Do you want to start now or do you want to start later? And is this the right price? Can you afford it? Right? And that opens the money door, which I think is a super crucial invitation. Make it normal that you talk about money because you talk about money all the time. And if it's not awkward to you, it's not going to be awkward to them because they might not want to ask for a discount or an installment or a payment plan, right? They might not want to say that, oh, I think it's too much. And this invites them to say, oh, yeah, this is going to be, to be honest, it's a bit too much. And then not to say, oh, yeah, I understand. But for me, I never thought about the question, oh, out of curiosity, how much too much? What did you come in with? Did you have a budget in mind? Because we're talking about money. And if I don't make it awkward, it's not awkward.
yeah.
We're just having an open conversation and I'm trying to make this work for me and for you. Right? So fairness is another big value of mine. And if this comes across, then it's genuine and then it's authentic and people feel safe in that conversation rather than awkward. And then maybe there is something I can do for you. Maybe don't. Maybe we need to wait. Maybe there's something else. Maybe there's a colleague I can refer you to who charges half the rates but is a good coach. So if you open the money door, really important. But I think generally it's helpful to think about and anticipate. Objections is sales language, right? But what might be in the way of this person getting to work with a good coach? The serving mentality, right? And you can anticipate quite a lot of that. And back then I said, okay, think about it. You know where to find me. And it's not helpful. And now I think about it very differently. And that's because I tuned into how I might respond to something I hear often. And you can do that through experience by hearing it often, or you can anticipate it and learn from people who have been doing it for a while, because you're going to hear a number of objections a whole lot of times.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and this is why I think it's really useful to have time for coaching, and to be, again, my ideas around this is to be really playful. I see it as a game, right?
Mm.
And I'm constantly looking
Mm.
at, there's going to be times where you left 20 minutes, half an hour, and your time is running out, and you're having a great conversation about this. And I just pause it and I say, hey, look, I noticed our time is finishing. What about we continue this conversation? And again, I'm not saying these are things you have to say, but for me, I just emphasize, like, for me, it's about the relationship, not the transaction, right? There's
Mm.
no rush. And I think, like, a lot of these things, are like, for me, like, I don't do this as a technique, but a lot of the things I do is opposite of what your average salesperson does. The average salesperson wants to close you on that call, right? And for them, it's like, well, a second call is more time, and that's very transactional thinking. And so I think, like, a big shift for,
Depends on the price tag as well, no?
yeah, I think depends on a lot of things, right? Like, but how a lot of coaches think at the beginning, and I used to think like that, is like, oh, I have 10 calls, and if 8 people don't sign up, like, there was like 8 failed sales calls, and I just wasted 8 hours of my time, right? But if you look at it as a relationship, I've had someone that I coached 7 years ago. I coached her for 3 sessions, and I remember at that time feeling a little bit disappointed that she hired someone else, and she came back 6 years later, and actually 7 years ago, when she didn't sign up, a few months later she made an introduction, right? And that guy became my first 25K client, right? And now she came back 6 years ago, and I look back, and it's happened so many times, right? When we focus on the relationship, when we leave people with a good feeling, we leave the door open, right? And not from a place of desperation, but from a place of, like, hey, you know what? Maybe it's not the right time, right? That's that approach, for me, that approach is of, like, a gardener versus a shark, right? Unfortunately, a lot of us, we want to learn sales, and most of the sales trainings, they teach you this shark mentality, right? And you just start seeing people as numbers, right? And I think that's a big part of this. Is part of it's like the how, and the other part is, like, really how you think about the process. When you start treating people really, like, like, if you treat every person as a human being, and you value that relationship, it's going to benefit you in so many different ways. People make a referral, they're more likely to make a referral, they're more likely to come back, right? And again, not doing that, don't do that as just like a sales technique. Because that's another thing, right? I used to think about, like, oh, actually, if I treat it like a relationship, I'm going to make more sales down the line. So it's just, again, getting really present with that. And it's more fun. I think it's more fun, right? Like, I look back on my calendar and I think, like, hey, I coached 10 people, 6 of them signed up. And I can look back at the other 4, like, they really got a lot out of the coaching. And, that has a positive impact, right? And I can look back and feel good about that. And so, yes, there are skills, there are things that we can do. If you follow this process, maybe we can, put the checklist somewhere. And again, you don't need to opt in. We'll just give it to you. Just start using it. And here's the thing, by the way, right? Follow the process, and then once it's working, and I know it will work because it's worked for so many people, then you can change some things later. I would encourage you not to make a lot of changes at the beginning, because it's that, sometimes there's a process on how you go from white belt to a blue belt, right? Every person does it a bit different.
It also needs to, but it also needs to be yours. I think it's better to do a not so effective process very authentically than to follow a process to the letter and it doesn't come across real, right? And it can take a little bit of practice to make this feel natural. So I think my encouragement is for everybody to practice, right? Do it with peers of coaching, ask friends to listen to your process. Hey, can you pretend to be a client? I just want to practice getting the words out of my mouth, because it might feel a little bit off at the beginning, and then you make it yours. The first time I asked someone, so, it's good you think about it, and while you want to think about it, maybe think about those kind of things. It didn't quite feel right.
Yeah,
but
that's
after I
important.
said it a few times, it started to be mine, and I found my own words around it. So that's
It
super
is.
important. And I wish back then I would have practiced, and I didn't.
Yeah.
And I felt stupid practicing, and I should
And
have.
I love what you shared there, Yannick. And I think that the thing is it's, for me, like, there's a framework that I use for this is 4 C's. It starts with a commitment to serve, commitment to help others, right? Commitment to be a professional coach. And then it takes courage. Like, it's not always going to feel totally authentic at the start, but then you bring more of you in the process. And with the courage, your capability grows. Like, you get better and better, and you start seeing like how you can bring more of your style into this. And then the 4 C, so the third C is capability, the 4 C is confidence. And then your confidence starts growing, and you start seeing, you're like, hey, I'm actually really good at this. I'm getting good at this. So I think that's, and being okay with not getting this perfect. There's times where I basically get off a call, I'm like, hey, that was a really good call, and I'm like, oh shit, we didn't even talk about when they're gonna pay. And so because we didn't talk about that,
Yeah.
the first coaching session is coming up, and then there's no payment, right? So a lot of this checklist was created by me seeing that, oh, if I forget this, they can fall through the bridge. And it's happened before, like where someone's like, they come to the session and then there's other things that come up, right? And so this is not like a recipe for like, for a perfect cake. It's just we're working with human beings. Sometimes things happen, right? Situations can change. But when you follow this process, what just starts happening is you're just basically holding their hand, guiding them through seeking permission, through leadership, coming from a place of love and care over the bridge. And what I get, by the way, like, again and again, which surprised me at the beginning, is people thanking me, right? Because they've been in so many sales calls where there's pressure. Like people, I've had people that say, you know what, I joined that other program for 10, 20, 25, 30,000. And I'm joking, right? And they're like, you know what, I just got pressured into buying that, right? And on the other side, it's like, because I'm asking them, I'm leading them, but they feel like they're in control. And they are in control. So it's not just like a setup, they're in control. And just in the last part, is once you've talked about how would you like to, you put the coaching calendar in the coaching session in the calendar. I ask them, how would you like to pay? They say, let's say it's upfront. Great. Which day can you, so I just confirm, like, okay, our first session is on Thursday, the 5th of November. By when can you make the payment? And this is such an important question, because now we set a date in the calendar. So when they say like, well, I can make it anytime, then I just lead and say, okay, can you make it by Monday the 3rd or Monday the 2nd? Right? And that's a little thing, by the way, that makes a big difference, because now we have an agreement on a date. And then I just recap it and say, okay, great. Our first session is on Thursday. The payment is due on Monday. I'm going to get that all in writing for you as well. And then sometimes, I don't always do this, but sometimes I just check with them, like, would you like a reminder for me on Monday? And they're like, no, actually, that's good. As long as you send me the payment link in advance, it's good. And almost always, it's usually the first session is, well, if they say, I want to start next week, it's next week. And I just make clear that the payment has to be before the session. And I like it to be at least a day before. But sometimes if they're flexible, I'll just ask them, can you do it by Monday? And here's the thing, by the way, when you ask them, they might say, you know what, actually, on Monday, I'm away. Can I do it on Tuesday? Now, this is why the conversation is useful. Because if they agree on a Monday, but they're not available, they're not going to do it. So what I found is just really useful. And in the last 6-7 years, 6 years, I think, right? It's 8 years now, next month. Last 6 years, I haven't chased anyone for payments. I don't get problems around payments, and it's just so effortless, right? I think it's like 99% of time, it just happens exactly according to agreement. And it's because we just create space for that, right?
And a good relationship, and
yeah,
trust,
exactly,
and autonomy, and agency.
exactly. And you can just, don't expect things, right? Don't expect things to be perfect. I just sometimes drop it, like I just mentioned at the end. Look, if there are any other questions, any hesitations, just drop me a message and we can discuss this.
Cool.
Yeah, so those are kind of like the step by step. But remember, it's not always going to be the same. Sometimes people want to think about it before they put a coaching session. Sometimes they want to look at finances before they give you an exact date. All those things, like you can work with those things. And that's why the conversation can be a lot longer. What do you do when someone says, oh, can I get back to you about the first session? Can I get back to you about the exact date? Right? And I just like to create clarity, like, okay, well, by when do you think you know? And I don't mind if someone says 1 day, 2 days. Personally, like I've had this once where someone says I need 2 weeks. And for me, that reflecting back on that, I think usually a few days is more than enough time. If someone says 2 weeks, it's usually a bit too long, right? But yeah, that probably opens up a whole different a whole different thing.
Yeah, that opens another conversation.
But just what I wanted.
I gave lots of people 2 weeks.
Yeah,
if they want.
Yeah,
to,
I don't think
right?
it's.
But I might get curious. But I often at that point, they sometimes explain why they need 2 weeks. But also, you're right. It opens a whole nother conversation, and I think we're pretty much out of time for what we've blocked in the calendar. So maybe we can do another part on this one as well.
Yeah, and I think the last thing on that is just treat it as any other part of the coaching process. Like if you're taking someone through a grow model, sometimes the client's just gonna go from talking about the goal, all of a sudden talking about the obstacles, right? And you're like, hey, no, let's not talk about the obstacles. Let's go back towards we're at the G now. Let's go to reality first before we go to the obstacles, right? And it's just sometimes you have to, you go and you go with the flow. And I think,
yeah, and the better you get at it, the more you're able to flow through these stages. Some of them are important to do incrementally, and because one is building on another. And I think in grow is less important than it is in a closing conversation. But like, I like things to flow, and I like to go with the flow of the conversation. And as you get better at it, I think you're able to flow with it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think in the beginning it's good to follow a sequence, and then you can make it yours and flow.
Yeah, if you think about this image, right? If you're walking with someone over a bridge, here's the fun part. When you get present with them, some people just are like, let's run. And they're like, woo! and then some people are like, ooh, can we just take it a little bit more slow? Let's take one step at a time. And I've encouraged, like, again, when you work with so many different people are different. I've had people that say, hey, look, I've been researching you. I've been looking into you. I want to just get started right now. Can we put a first call in? I'm ready to pay right now. I've prayed on this. I've talked to my husband,
Fair.
And I'm like, okay. And in the beginning, that would really put me off because they're like messing up with my process. Like, no, go talk to your husband, go sleep over it. They're like, I've done all of that. And I think that's where you just be playful. And like some people, look, they've walked over this bridge so many times, and they're comfortable walking over that bridge. So it's looking at who's in front of me, what is coming up, because people that have maybe gone through that bridge and felt like they had a really awful experience, you might have to adjust a little bit. So it's looking at who am I working with, and not just being present with the process, but being present with the person in front of you. And that's obviously like what's going to create mastery is both, being present with the person and the process at the same time.
Oh, I love that metaphor. What just came up for me is some people, they're on a bridge, and if the last bridge was like they had a bad experience, they might want to rock the bridge a little bit. They might want to stomp hard a little bit to see if it's stable and safe, right? So you might find a client just like push you a little bit and just test to see if you're not as bad a bridge as this other person was that they had a bad experience with. So don't be shaken by that. Just give them a safe experience. And some of that comes with experience, that kind of confidence. But if you know in your heart that you want the best for this person, and if you're confident that your coaching has good potential to help them, sometimes the best coach is the coach in front of them. Yeah. There's always going to be some better coach out there, but often the best coach is the one in front of you who they have access to now and they could start working next week. So stand firm in that confidence that working with you is going to be helpful, regardless of how good a coach you are, right? Working with someone is going to be helpful. You might not be the best coach ever. There's always a better coach out there, but you're there, and that you're there now, and you're willing to help, and you're a good human being.
Yeah. And I think that's where you kind of make it about them, not about you, right? Because, you can have your own stuff going on. And that's why it's important to have a supervisor, to have your own coach, to have your own therapist, have your own support system, right? But in that moment, it's just sometimes someone just needs you to help them go through that process. And that's why I think like there's always three. I see it as three parts to it, and maybe in another episode we can go deeper on this. But there's you, the coach, and everything else is coming up on your side, your beliefs, your stories. There's the person, and then there's the process. And we talked today more about the process and a little bit about the person in front of you. But there's those three things. When you keep working on all three, that's when you create a level of mastery in the enrollment process. And it's again just being open and bringing it to supervision sessions, bringing it to coaching sessions. You're not going to create mastery through just theory. It's like anything else, right? If you want to get good at swimming, you get in the water and have someone give you feedback.
Yeah. We need to bring it to a close here, Siwash. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your experience. I think this was full of gems and nuggets. And nice how we have different processes, but how they are so aligned at the crucial principles. So,
yeah, it's a pleasure. And I'd love to hear from people like, what they're getting from this, and go and put it into practice. And love to hear what happens after that.
Nice one. I'll definitely be adding that to my coaching starter kit. This is gold. Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Siwash. I see you soon.
All right, see you soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for being with us today. I appreciate your commitment to learning and growing as a coach. Just a few things before you go. First of all, we're doing this for you. So if there's anything you'd like us to talk about, do send us a question. Secondly, we're not doing this for profit, so we rely on your support to help us reach as many coaches as we can. So if you can send this episode to a friend or tell a fellow coach about what we're doing here, maybe you can subscribe or leave us a review, or even support us on Patreon. That would be amazing. And lastly, you can find us across all major platforms. So whether you like to watch, or you like to listen, or you like to download episodes and listen to it in your car while you're driving through somewhere with no internet, you can do so too. And that's it from us. Thank you, and I hope to see you next time.